spent my life going to these dangerous places and never really explaining to her what I was doing and holding back a lot of the things that I saw and the risks that I was taking, because it's your mother and you don't want to worry them.
Stephen Dupont is my guest today, and I'll tell you a bit about him in just a second's time. If I sound a bit out of breath, I've walked to the top of Beacon Hill. I always used to think Beacon Hill was 261 metres. I've always said it's 261 metres, but I looked it up today, and there was a website that said it's 248 metres. Either somebody's been along in the night and whipped off a few metres, or I was wrong all along. Guess which one is probably more accurate? Let me make a sketchbook picture. Even though I'm 248 stroke 63, 62, 61 metres up, which is not a big mountain, but it's a quarter of some fairly healthy ones, isn't it? Even though I'm that far up, you can still hear the rumble of traffic below on the A34 bypass. Hopefully with, is that a swallow or a skylark behind me, which conveniently seems to have stopped. Right. What should we photograph? Let's get a nice sketchbook image of the path. I took some images on the way up, but I felt that I might be too out of puff to do the show at the same time. So I thought, right, I'll hot foot up, and then when I get to the top, I'll start to record. Right, 1300, f4, 160 ISO, a sketchbooker to start the show. Let's pick the letters up. Let me précis a few words from Stephen's biography, and then I have some thoughts about war, which seems particularly pertinent right now. Stephen Dupont is an Australian photographer and director working on films, commercials, magazine and newspaper assignments, and long-term personal projects, of which you'll hear about. Born in Sydney, 1967. That's not very fair. Same age as me, but he's got far more hair. No, correct that, he's got hair. He grew up in the western suburbs and southern highlands under tough social conditions and displacement, with social worker parents who were full-time carers of state wards. I think that bit's very important, because it helps you understand how he thinks when you hear the interview today, though it's a subject we didn't talk about. See, there's a box set coming up in the future. He's recognised around the world for his concerned photography on the human condition, war and climate, earning him dozens of prizes, including the Eugene Smith Grant, a Robert Capa Gold Medal Citation, and several World Press Photo Awards. He holds a master's degree in philosophy, enjoys teaching workshops, and gives public talks about photography, film, and his life. It's his view of war and the taboo subject of death that intrigued me during our conversation. We do visit some darkish places today. I tell you what, the old red velvet sofa that I haul behind me each week on these walks to hide behind when things affect my very English sensibilities. I think a few of us may well be hiding together behind that today. It's tough to drag it up this hill. 248, 261, 3 metres. It's a long way. But I do think there's also his incredible, almost wizardly-like genius when it comes to the handmade books that he produces and the stage show that he appeared in, which I will leave as a surprise for later on during the show. I think if somebody goes to war, it's bound to leave its impression, and all those photographers who I personally know now who've done that have a certain something about them. I can't find a word or an adequate way to transmit to you what that is, what that something is in their eye, a catch in their voice perhaps, when or if the subject should surface. But there's a poem about a war photographer that was written by Carol Ann Duffy, a Scottish poet, the first Scottish poet laureate in the Roll's 400-year history. And at the time, War Photographer, the poem, was written by Carol Ann. She was friendly with Don McCullin and the late Philip Jones Griffiths, two very, very well-respected and internationally renowned war photographers. Caroline Duffy was absolutely fascinated by the draw of this kind of photographic calling. And, well, if you'll allow me, I'd like to read back her words as we walk together, because I think this will play extremely importantly, certainly, into one of my questions. In his dark room, he's finally alone, with spools of suffering set out in ordered rows. The only light is red and softly glows, as though this were a church and he, a priest, preparing to intone a mass. Belfast, Beirut, Phnom Penh, all flesh is grass. He has a job to do. Solutions slop in trays beneath his hands, which did not tremble then, though seem to now. Rural England, home again to ordinary pain, which simple weather can dispel, to fields which don't explode beneath the feet of running children in a nightmare heat. Something is happening. A stranger's features faintly start to twist before his eyes. A half-formed ghost, he remembers the cries of this man's wife, how he sought approval without words to do what someone must, and how the blood stained into foreign dust. 100 agonies in black and white, from which his editor will pick out 5 or 6 for Sunday's supplement. The reader's eyeballs prick with tears between the bath and pre-lunch beers. From the aeroplane he stares impassively at where he earns his living, and they do not care.
Today on the Photo Walk.
I've always seen that, or I've felt that with my photographs, it's always been a really great way for me to communicate. I said to him I would like to photograph his gang and members of his gang, and firstly he was shocked that we walked in there, and he said, no one walks in here, no one comes in uninvited. I think we had a good sense that, we weren't going to get killed, but we didn't know what was going to happen. You're in that situation where you don't know where you're going to run to because you don't know where you are. Being a freelancer is frustrating. I mean, there's no question about it, but it's a life you choose to take. There is no more powerful medium than photography, I don't think, in terms of the power it can have on people.
I am truly humbled and privileged to be talking on the show with Stephen Dupont, who is a name known throughout the world for his incredible eye when it comes to a story about humans. And before I give you a flavour of today's mailbag and what's on the show, thank you to our extra milers, sincerely thank you. And also MPB, who sponsor this show and keep us here week on week. I'm, as I said last week, about to visit MPB in the coming month or two to make some short films that we're going to be using on the YouTube channel. We'll be talking about quality used kit, because mpb.com as a website is where you can safely buy and sell and trade quality used photo and video gear online and become a part of the circular economy. I can't remember how many years it is, but I've got a feeling it's got to be easily 6, maybe 7 years that I've been using MPB personally, because it's easy to use. You go online to mpb.com, you click the button at the top of the website that says Start Selling and Trading, and you follow the very easy instructions where you're prompted to enter the model name and click a box for the appropriate condition if you're selling or trading, that is. From there, your kit, well, they'll collect it from your front door, and then MPB pays you for your camera gear within days. MPB's price commitment provides the right price up front, and they provide instant quotes that are guaranteed for 14 days. They never add on those horrible hidden fees. And mpb.com, well, it's easy to buy from as well. You just search for the kit you want, and usually you're given a good choice of various conditions of kit that you can then purchase. So make money by avoiding seller fees when you sell to MPB with a price commitment that gives visual storytellers the right price up front for our kit. I'll have a link on the show page today, or you can remember these 3 letters, MPB and then addon.com. On the show today, remembering and respecting, as Matthias Fox, one of our fabulous supporters of the show, takes a pilgrimage of quiet in France and Belgium along the Western Front of the First World War. Remembering the Pips today. Actually getting sentimental about the Pips, and I don't mean those who sang with Gladys Knight. Postcards from Canada, Toronto in particular, with Christopher Parsons, and the countdown has begun for the last week of entries to this month's assignment, which, if you haven't heard, American photographer Stephen Wilkes will repeat later on. Right, shall we walk? Checklist out. Coffee, check. Garibaldi's, check. Walking shoes, check. Lots of breath as we're walking uphill today. Check. Let's walk. Welcome along as we make our photo walk. A show for those who find escapism and peace away from the noise, he says, still able to hear the A34 bypass just below me. Putting miles under our feet and making a picture or three to remind us of where those footprints were left. Letters, guests, and even a song at the end of the show. But do not fear, as I said last week, it will not be me singing it. Usually, I'd say something along the lines of, to see the pictures from this first letter, go to the show page for episode 430 and they'll be there. But no, you can't do that today, not with this first letter, because, firstly, it's a postcard, if you're being picky about these things. And secondly, the pictures. They're all postcards. Real, tangible, hold it in your hands postcards that arrived in a package from Canada. Not digital ones and zeros, but cards featuring black and white street photographs printed on a stock of paper that I know as Curious Touch, from a printing job I did years ago. I remember when I was printing, I think it was one of the first brochures that I ever made, and I went along to my local company, Apple Print, nothing to do with the huge Apple Technologies company, no, Apple Print. And the person I was talking to, my friend Andy said to me, we've got a new stock of paper in, I think you'll love it, and it's ideal for your brochure. Which it was. 3 times the price. Andy knew what he was doing, forever the salesman, but it was amazing. It was called Curious Touch, and I held this paper in my hand, and it had this kind of, velvety texture. It's very difficult to describe. Velvet, it really isn't enough for the experience of holding this stock of paper. If I could print a book on this, it'd probably be overkill actually, but it was so difficult to describe. But he knew the moment I held this paper in my hand, I was absolutely sold. And I made, 2,000 brochures. It cost me a mortgage payment, plus probably another mortgage payment, and I've still got a few left. But I loved the paper, the experience, the tangible experience of holding this particular paper stock in my hand. And that's what I think. It may be a different name, of course, and different printers and different paper merchants, but I think that's what these postcards are printed on. So here's a postcard. Lots of postcards, actually. Handwritten from Christopher Parsons. Dear Neil. See, this is getting more and more analogue by the moment. I love it. Dear Neil. I hope you're listening to this on your transistor radio today, by the way. Dear Neil, you've shared numerous scrapbook postcard images with the rest of us for years now. I wanted to share a few physical postcards I made from images I created during 2023. Each month, I selected one image to print. One for January, one for Feb, one for March, one for April, one for... We get the idea, Neil. Together, the images represent at least some of how I saw Toronto during the last year through each of the 4 seasons. I've always found that printing work creates important visual milestones of progress in my own photography, while also showcasing areas for future development. My choice of postcards was to experiment with a new medium after being inspired by you and Ted Forbes sometime in the fall or winter of 2022. Thanks for everything you share with us, and I look forward to hearing you and more of your guests. Chris Parsons in Canada land. Well, first of all, I was so excited to receive these. I took them straight out of the packaging, and they're all jumbled up within seconds. But I can work out which seasons were which by the snow on the floor and by what people are wearing clothing-wise. Typical me. Don't read the instructions before you unpackage something. The same thing at school with exams. Read this first, and when you get to the end, it says you didn't need to answer questions 1, 3, 7, and 9. Oh, I wasted an hour doing those. They were my favourite answers. Ted Forbes the film you mentioned, I'm not sure whether I found the particular one where he was talking about postcards. Well, I did find one such film, and I will put that on the show page today. But I picked out a particular favourite of mine. I know there's 12, I shouldn't have a favourite, but this one, I love this. It's a chap walking along the city sidewalk. It's a winter one, definitely, because he's wearing what looks like layer upon layer of coats. If you could squeeze 4 or 5 layers of coats on, you would. It gets cold, doesn't it, in Canada land? I know that. I bought some boots, actually, in Austria land a couple of weeks ago, and they say on the side, I don't know why it boasts it, I've never had a pair of boots that does this before. I had to replace the lower ones, remember? They fell apart. Yes, Neil. But these ones go down to minus 30 degrees. Minus 30? Whew. That is Canadian language. That's almost cryogenic in my language. Practically. Set me out to space. That's cryogenic standard, minus 30 in my language anyway. But yes, I picked out a particular favourite. So it's this chap, layers and layers of coats. He's walking along the sidewalk, and he's giving you, with your camera, Chris, what we would call in the house the dog's side eye. The one that says, that dog toy with a squeaker at one end, the rope at the other. I think you'll find that's mine. No-go area. Barney isn't with me this week, by the way, but he would. He's with his girlfriend. He would agree with that. He'd say, "Yeah, that's my side-eye look," and that's the look this chap's giving you. My gran had a similar look, actually, if you went a little bit too near the sherry trolley. And next to him, there's a sign that says, "Caution, falling ice overhead." So it's a wonderful, expressionful picture. I loved it. Thank you for all those postcards. They're really great. I'm building a collection of some super stuff that you've so kindly sent in across the years. And when this YouTube channel does eventually surface, the camera, by the way, arrived a few days ago. It's here. Then I got a feeling I might be doing some films on some of these bits and bobs that you send in. I'll leave a link for Christopher's portfolio, which, because I've got the postcards, I've got the real thing, but I'd like you to see his glass gallery. It will be on the show page, and you'll be able to see more of Christopher's work on that. I love the idea of postcards. I really do. Printing your work on postcards. It's the perfect calling card as a photographer, isn't it? Infinitely more interesting than a business card, although you can get those small moo cards make them. I think Ted Forbes might have mentioned this in his film. I think they were moo cards that he was using, but moo cards make these smaller postcards. I think it's moo, where you can put multiple images. So you can literally have a postcard collection, mini form. But I do like postcards. And I doubly, triply love the concept we've discussed of leaving postcards in places like libraries and in bookshops, and cafes, coffee shops, and in the telephone boxes that once upon a time held that thing called telephones. Telephone? What's that, Neil? Telephone? But they now have, a lot of them in the UK anyway, have pop-up libraries. So that seems to be a good place to leave your art. And you're never sure who's going to discover what you've created. So, thanks, Chris. Wonderful to receive these. I shall treasure them. I'm on the western side of this old hill fort, Iron Age hill fort. That's what Beacon Hill is. I would imagine it was quite successful. Who'd climb this in a hurry? What are you doing today, Bob? Oh, I marked down to go and conquer that hill fort just over near Newbury. How are you? Oh, good luck on that one. Yeah, I think I might call in sick. Yeah. I don't want to be running up an Iron Age hill fort today. There's got to be other things to do. Should we play Angry Birds instead? Yeah, let's do that, Bob. Yeah, the western side, bit quieter. Can't hear the A34 now. Oh, bliss. But it is quite windy, so I'm trying to shield the microphone from the wind, from the gusts that are coming in. You might be able to hear the sheeps, as they're called. Oh, who calls them that? It was on that farming Clarkson, he calls them sheeps, doesn't he? Might be able to hear the sheeps just in the valley below me. There's quite a few of them. Look at them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Have you gone to sleep yet? 16, 17. I never believed that counting sheep thing. It never worked. I always used to lose count and have to start again. We were talking about phones just a moment ago. While I'm bimbling, I was trying to explain to the kids what we used to do if we needed to phone somebody while we were out. You go to this phone box, you put a 10p coin in. I think in the real olden days, you were able to put different coins in, weren't you? Did it used to work out what was a 5p or a 2p? I think you were able to put different coins in. Or am I dreaming that? Could be. Somebody help me. But you could only put them in. You only put them in when the pips went. So you dialed the person you wanted to speak to. Ring, 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 ring. They'd pick it up. Pip, 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 pip. And you put the 10p in. Although some phone boxes, when they weren't working properly, the mechanism would jam and you couldn't get the 10p in. Bit frustrating. But yeah, it was a bit of pips. What's the pips, Dad? Pips. What century did you come from? It's like the pips on the radio. Don't hear those anymore, do we? Long before our watches aligned themselves with time so accurate you didn't need to set your wind up to the radio. This sound, I looked it up. This sound was the most accurate way of resetting your watch. Do you remember those? Huh? No, Neil. Not in my country. You sure you're not still living in the Iron Age? But it's stuff like this that my kids find really amusing. Highly amusing, intriguing, and a point for extreme ridicule, all at the same time. There's a very interesting, I found it interesting, a shortish film about the time pips, which I shall put on the film on the show page. See, these are the rabbit holes I sometimes find myself delving down deeply into when I'm reading your letters and planning the show. The pips, anyway. My guest today, I think in my introduction you got a very good idea of who he is and what makes him tick photographically and as a human. I alluded to in our introduction this. In 2017, a one-man theatrical show, Don't Look Away, took his personal journey through photography and war and the sudden death of his mother. I looked it up actually because this one-man theatrical show, it's not like a TED Talk. This is extraordinary. I looked it up, desperate that somebody may have recorded it and popped it onto the tube of view, but alas, nothing came back. Like the postcards a moment ago, perhaps some things really are better experienced in person. But this was lauded as one of the most original ways in which a photographer has shared his thoughts, his stories, his pictures, and we'll be talking about that in, I think, part 2, actually. I think pin and drop, actually, was probably a suitable expression for how that show would have been received, but that's later on anyway. We'll also talk about the imperfection of photography, which is a subject that we have talked a little bit about of late, why you don't have to strive for the perfect frame when really it's all about the perfect feeling. And I use the word feeling over moments, which is an expression used constantly in photography by just about every photographer that I've heard speak. But feeling is what I'm going to suggest here for good reason. And I use it, that word feeling, as it forms a very important aspect in the first part of our conversation. Here's the photographer, well, the artist, the bookmaker, the filmmaker, goodness, Stephen Dupont. Stephen, when I research an interview, I read, I pore over the pictures on your website or Instagram. Sometimes I look through X threads. I often go and look at films on YouTube. Actually, I listen to them. You're a dog owner. I listen to them on my dog walks.
Well, my dog walks are usually the morning news. I listen to the ABC News. It's my news coverage of the morning, and sometimes I listen to podcasts, on my walks as well.
Well, I was doing the latter. I was walking with Barney, and I was playing back your APJ Journal film, episode 1 from 3 years back. And I thought I'd start with a question that we often end with, but I'm going to reframe it slightly. You pondered over this in the film when the question was, why do you take photographs?
I was expecting that at the end, Neil.
I know.
Yeah. No, let's just get straight into it, shall we? Yeah. Look, for me, photography is freedom. It's freedom to speak. I've always seen that, or I've felt that with my photographs, it's always been a really great way for me to communicate, what's going on, what I'm seeing, and how I'm feeling as well. Photography has been, it's been such a prolific part of my life since I was very young. Right from the outset of my photography, it was about just having that freedom to travel, to see the world. And I think once I got deeper into being a photographer, I really understood the importance of it. I think when I started out, I was quite naive, but then I felt this incredible responsibility. I felt this incredible importance with what I was photographing, because I was putting myself into some pretty, major stories, international news stories, global stories. And I felt that responsibility to make sure that I was delivering something that had not just the kind of creative side of things that I was trying to make these powerful photographs, but would tell the story and would actually have an impact on whoever was seeing them. And I've learned a lot about myself as well.
Yeah.
I think that also I've learned a lot about photography. I mean, when I started off, I was inspired by a certain kind of photography, and it's taken me a lifetime or 30 odd years to sort of discover that actually I'm not the photographer I started out as. I'm very, very much a different kind of photographer and a very, very much a different kind of person.
That, you mentioned your inspirations. I know one of them, the original mentor, I think you called him, was Don McCullin, who famously said, if you can't feel anything in your photographs, then people won't either. Which probably, when I look at your pictures, explains this raw texture to your work.
Well, I think that quote rings very close to my heart. And yes, Don McCullin was without doubt my greatest mentor from a very young age. I mean, it was seeing his photographs that really made me become a photographer.
Yeah.
And when he said that if people can't film my photographs, or if I can't film my photographs, then no one else can feel them. So it's important to make that kind of imagery. That really rang true to me in a big way. I just felt that Don's photographs were really raw. They just had this incredible compassion and real sense of humanity, and at the same time were like something out of, Dante's Inferno. Yeah. I mean, it really was this kind of clash of, brutality versus beauty, and I love that about his photographs. And I read his biography as a young person called Unreasonable Behavior, and something in his life and his upbringing, I felt a kind of kindred spirit. I felt a real connection with him personally and his way of thinking and his life. And so, he became a big influence. And in fact, I don't think I would have gone off to cover war photography if I hadn't have seen his photographs. But Don was one of many that inspired me. I mean, the first exhibition that I ever saw in my memory was In Our Time, which was a Magnum show. And that was the first time I'd seen photography. And so, from that, and then McCullin, and then I would sort of look at a lot of the Magnum photographers. I mean, Josef Kudelka was a really great influence on me. And, and then I sort of started looking at Robert Frank and Gary Winogrand and William Klein and people like that. I was starting to get a feeling for what kind of photography am I going to make? And I think as a young photographer starting out, I was trying to make these photographs that I suppose were technically strong and almost perfect, trying to make this perfection in the photography and trying to sort of photograph a kind of imagery that came out of that school. And it's funny because I look at my photography now and it's anything but that, creating imperfection and really loving the kind of more fluid, more raw, more sort of not so thoughtful, just reacting to situations a lot better and capturing moments that I feel deep within inside me, that I'm seeing things so differently now.
It's interesting that you mentioned the imperfect pictures. It's only a couple of weeks ago I was talking with John Dolan about the imperfect perfect. Now, I know he works in an entirely different genre to that of your work. But where did this project, Fucked Up Photos, where did that idea come from to show the images that weren't so perfect?
I sort of started to look at my contact sheets. It was actually during COVID when I couldn't travel, and so I spent a lot of time in the studio and a lot of time looking at work that I hadn't seen for sometimes 20 years or more. And one, it was really interesting looking at this work again and seeing it with new eyes. I mean, it's interesting because when you're editing your work on contact sheets, you make chinograph marks and they stay there. And then maybe other editors have added their marks and things have happened over time. And then you go back to them 20 years later and it's incredible to see all the photographs that I missed, that I just thought, how could I have not seen that? And I had them. I'd made the pictures, but I didn't have that knowledge or that kind of, maybe that creative mind back then to actually mark them up and edit them. I would have had this kind of pressure on me from a magazine or a newspaper to create a certain kind of imagery. And then as I was going through, because I actually went through my entire archive, Neil, and I started to see the light leaks and I started to see the emulsion damage and double exposures and X-ray damage. And I thought, hang on, there's something really interesting here, I think. I mean, I had no idea if it would work as a project, but I really went into a whole new form of editing, and all I did was edit out all the fucked up photos. Yeah. And I used to call them broken frames because they kind of are broken. And so I started to pull these out. And in the end, I actually had a pretty substantial edit. Yeah. And I felt I'll do something with this. I'll design a book and I'll edit it and put it into make a book dummy. And then I felt I had to write something about it. I had to justify what these photographs were and why I chose them. And so I wrote this essay and explained to whoever's going to read it one day to sort of explain that, look, there's this real beauty in the imperfections of these images.
Sometimes the imperfections were not of your making. It wasn't necessarily opening up the back of the camera while there's a roll of film still in there. Some of them were moments like X-ray damage, weren't they? Yeah,
well, there were many kinds of destructive measures within the context of the photographs, but some of them were X-ray damage, and specifically a time that I had to take my films through Tel Aviv airport in Israel, and they were X-rayed 10 times through 3 different machines. Sure. But they ended up being really beautiful and interesting, like some sort of just a whole other world of kind of a kind of photograph. And so they, along with all the other destructive elements like the light leaks and the double exposures, this project ended up being something, I think quite beautiful and interesting. And I really wanted people to see this work. I really wanted to show something that I felt has come out of my archive.
Well, it's such a unique way of showing parts of your archive. I'll leave a link for it on the show page today. I recommend you go and look at Stephen's Fucked Up Photos, as they're called as a project name. Now, the word war photographer or war photography, conflict photography, your stories are far broader than that. I mean, it's about the human condition, as you say so on your website as well. Do you see yourself labelled in any kind of way? I suspect you don't, because the human condition is such a vast canvas, isn't it?
It is, and I've had labels thrown at me, from being war photographer to photojournalist to documentary photographer, street photographer. I don't really see myself as a label. I see myself as a photographer, as a storyteller.
Yeah.
I've been working in many different fields now, and not just photography, but filmmaking. And a big part of my practice is designing my own books. So making handmade artist books and adding sketching and writing. And so, whether it be a traditional classical kind of photo book, or whether it's something much more multidimensional, whether it's kind of a concertina that sort of fold out images, or whether it's something that's created in the dark room with liquid emulsion, which is a book that I did recently.
Oh, well, this is the perfect time then to dig a little deeper in terms of your bookmaking, because your books, they're absolutely beautiful, very short runs often of handmade books made by you that have become the kind of thing photographic collectors have been collecting internationally. Museums and libraries doing the same all over the world. But there's a real process to your books. When did you start making them?
Around 2004, I produced my first handmade book, which was it was a project I'd photographed in Papua New Guinea on gangs. They call them rascals, which is pidgin for criminal. Yeah. And I'd infiltrated this one gang and was invited to spend time with them over many weeks, and I was able to photograph them. And back then I was using Polaroid film, a large format Polaroid camera, positive, negative film, and I'd made this project which when I got back to Australia to edit the work, it became an exhibition. And then I thought, well, what can I do with this? How can I make this sort of, how can I put this into a book? And I sort of designed it originally as a kind of a book dummy that I would show a publisher. But I think it kind of got a little bit out of hand, and I kind of got a bit excited with the whole process of hand printing in the darkroom. And it ended up being this very elaborate 24 by 20-inch silver gelatin monster book that I kind of concertinaed up as an accordion, and then put stainless steel covers, and I sort of did chemical etchings in stainless steel. I just went the whole, and then kind of bolted it up. It was this very industrial book that I made only 4 copies of, and I was originally going to edition it as 12, and it took so long, and it was so just very expensive to make, and I just felt that I couldn't really keep making them, and ended up selling them to some interesting collectors. But what was great, it actually also became the book that got the book published in the end. So in other words, I showed it to a publisher, and they took the same design, and then they did a mainstream publication that was Powerhouse. So for me, it was a win-win situation. Yeah. And in fact, a lot of my published books now, they've all come from my original designed handmade books. So when I went to Steidl and showed Gerhardt my Generation AK book, it was the book that I designed by hand. And Gerhardt took this big book in front of him, and he said to me, I want to publish this book. This book is almost a masterpiece.
Well, if the books aren't weighing down your shelves and buckling your shelves, the awards certainly will be, because you've won a fair few in your time. You're a proud recipient of a Robert Capa Gold Medal citation. Someone who eventually succumbed to curiosity. You're perfectly positioned to understand this this fragility of curiosity, because you have danced precariously at times within its sights, and that sort of hauntingly revealed itself to me on your Rascals series, which again I recommend you go visit on the website. The machete-wielding young man in Papua New Guinea, along with Eddie, who's aiming his sidearm at you in another PNG portrait. I wonder what you feel when you look into the eyes of some of these people. You think they are one of the most dangerous gangs, if not the most dangerous gang in the world, and you're looking directly into their eyes, and they're looking directly back at you, some of them with arms. Yeah,
look, it was my first time in Papua New Guinea, and I wanted to go there for some time to make a photographic project. And when I went there with a friend of mine, Ben Bohane, who's a writer, and Ben and I went up to do this story together, and we needed to find a gang, and we found this this gang, not by accident, but we were told about this gang that was based inside a settlement called Calgary, which is one of the biggest settlements in Port Moresby. And settlements are kind of like ghettos. I mean, they're very marginalized, very low income, poverty stricken kind of places, and yes, and very dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. And we certainly didn't know what we were doing, but we had a few contacts, and we basically just sort of, as you do, you take a chance, and we just walked into this settlement to try and meet the leader of this gang. We had his name and so forth. And it just so happened that the settlement was in the middle of a tribal war. Oh. And so it was very tense. And we met Alan, who was the leader of the Kipskaboney Rascal Gang, and he was a gentleman. We sat down with him and we talked to him about the project we wanted to do, and I said to him I would like to photograph his gang and members of his gang, and he firstly he was shocked that we walked in there, and he said no one walks in here, no one comes in uninvited, especially white people, so it was kind of like he thought that was pretty cool, and so sometimes you take that chance and you front the situation in a very positive, happy way and explain what you're doing, and it worked. I mean, I think we had a good sense that we weren't going to get killed, but we didn't know what was going to happen. No. But it turned out that they were very accommodating, and in fact, since I photographed them, I built up a relationship with the community, and I've been returning to that community year after year. Wow. And in fact, I just made a film, was released recently, which is set in that community as well.
I'm not sure why you'd necessarily be walking through an HR department, but if they did one of those personality index forms with you, lots of check boxes, I wonder what your report would look like. Mr. Dupont, would you consider yourself A, risk averse, B, calculated when it comes to risk, C, prepared to take risks, or D, just plain straight up courageous? Yeah, I don't really see myself as courageous. I think I've done a lot of stupid things in my life. I think I certainly have taken some really unnecessary risks, especially while I was younger. And I think that's sort of partly to blame the pressure I put on myself to make a name for myself in the context of being a photographer and covering conflict. So, when I started out, I was actually based in London, and I cut my teeth in London. I was working as a freelancer, competing with some of the best photographers in the world. It's a lot of pressure on a young person, and you want to go out there and make a name for yourself. And so I think there were times that I took some pretty, big risks, and I think I've learned, though, over the years, to certainly from my experiences of covering frontline situations and being in those kind of war zones, you learn a lot about the risks that you should and shouldn't take. I have been in some unfortunate situations, like the suicide bombing in Afghanistan and, Africa's sort of multiple kind of dangerous scenarios and things like that. But I've definitely been conscious about trying to avoid unnecessarily being at the wrong place at the wrong time. We will come back to your experience in Afghanistan. I think it's an important part of the conversation with you. In terms of the end, while we're sort of down this dark alleyway of death, of photographing death. It's kind of my theme, Neil. Well, it's part of life, isn't it? The process and circle of life. And as a photographer of stories where the final chapter is most certainly a part of what you photograph, you've not shied away from investigating further what many would find a bit too squeamish. But you do have a project called Death, a project around the theme of the D word, where you've confronted the topic. It's something that we're all confronting. It's one of those things. It's like, what births, deaths, and marriages. It's kind of the three big ones of life, And
what I find fascinating about death is the various cultures that have rituals around death and how they treat death, and also how death becomes so kind of important within different situations. And there's also a lot of, I don't know, it's demystifying the concept of death in a way. It's kind of working through different, rituals, different cultures, different people who death has become such an important part of their lives. But if you dig deeper into my own soul, I think that, my father died when I was 13, and that had a profound impact on me. I think when it happened, I didn't really feel it, because as a 13-year-old, you kind of block it out and you just get on with things. And but I think it really did have an impact on me. And I know that I carried a mantra for a long time through my life, and particularly when I decided to be a photographer, was that I was doing this for my dad. He was up there looking at me the whole way. Wow. And in fact, I think when I was going into these places and taking risks, I did have this feeling that he was looking out for me. And so I think that early experience of, my father dying maybe stuck with me. And in fact, I only realized recently when I kind of decided I would actively try and make a project around death that I'd sort of been photographing it my whole life, in many different forms,
I'm pretty sure I haven't asked this following question in the way I'm about to ask over an entire career of interviewing people now, or in my past as a broadcaster. But it's occurred to me, because of what you said about your belief that there'd be moments where you think your dad has been looking down on you, perhaps looking after you during the more challenging moments of your career. Are you a man of faith? Do you believe in a God? And if you do, is that faith rather challenged by what you see? Look,
I can tell you that I've been in situations where I've prayed to God that, get me out of this alive.
Yeah.
I remember when I was pinned down in Zaire, just after not long after the genocide in Rwanda, I was caught in a really bad situation with some other colleagues, some TV crew and some other journalists, and we were pinned down under fire for quite a bit of time. And you're in that situation where you either run and you don't know where you're going to run to because you don't know where you are. And it's like jungle and kind of savanna grass, or you stand up with your hands up and hope that they don't shoot you. And in the end, we stood up, because I think if we'd run, we would have got shot anyway. They would have, and in fact, I think obviously we made the right decision because they didn't shoot us. But it was one of those situations where you're lying in a ditch and you're praying to God that you're going to live.
Goodness.
But when you ask me about faith and do I believe in God, I don't go to church. I don't generally think much about faith in terms of God. Saying that, I've had a long interest in religions, and I've got a long interest in different faiths, from Islam to Buddhism and Christianity and so forth. And I find it deeply fascinating that the belief and the faith in God, or in that, that spiritual world, it's, one of the most powerful mediums there is, the most powerful kind of things that people go through. It's also one of the most destructive, in terms of conflict. So it's it's an interesting kind of dilemma. I don't think I would say I actively believe in God, but I have an interest in that world. And I think there are moments, like I said, when I've needed to come to God in desperation, maybe.
And Stephen Dupont returns for part 2 of our conversation shortly on the programme. I'm at Beacon Hill today. Oh, bumblebee on floor. Oh no, bumblebee, I've got no sugar with me. I can't do the sugar trick. Are you taking a rest? Oh, I'll go round you. Take a wide berth. There's a part there's a square that's fenced off at the top of Beacon Hill. That is a tomb A tomb with secrets. There's a sign that's just been put up, actually. Here we go. I'm sure this used to be an iron sign, but it seems to have been replaced with something far more modern. George Edward Stanhope Molyneux Herbert. There's a name. 5th Earl of Carnarvon. Now, we're looking down. I know you may have heard me talk about this before when we've been to the top of Beacon Hill. I haven't been here for a while, having said that, because the weather has been so grim, so wet over the winter that you just could not get up the path. The path that takes you the 248/261 metres has worn away practically. It's just, the steps that were there, most of them have been flushed down this path. I made some pictures on the way up. Hopefully you'll get an idea. But as I look, so this would be to the northwest. Never eat shredded wheat. What, Neil? Sorry, it's an English thing. North, east, south. Yes, north. I think northwest, slightly. Anyway, it is the castle called Highclere Castle. It's a stately home, not really a castle, but and it's where Downton Abbey is filmed, and the Carnarvon family. That's their seat of residence. George Edward Stanhope Molyneux Herbert, 5th Earl of Carnarvon, 26th of June, 1866, to the 5th of April, 1923. Adventurer, explorer, archaeologist, who, with his colleague, Howard Carter, discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun. Now, I believe, not sure if it's still there, but if it's not there now, there often is an exhibition of relics from the tomb of Tutankhamun or certainly the pyramid. But of course there's a darker story behind this, isn't there? Is this a time just to drop back to the studio? I think it probably is, for Studio Neil to put some flesh on the bones, which is probably a very unfortunate turn of phrase for this particular story.
In November 1922, the world held its breath as the British archaeologist Howard Carter, with his patron Lord Carnarvon by his side, uncovered the long-lost tomb of the boy pharaoh Tutankhamun in Egypt's Valley of the Kings. The discovery sparked global fascination, unveiling a treasure trove of ancient artifacts, revealing insights into the life and death of a once-forgotten ruler. Lord Carnarvon's financial backing was absolutely instrumental in Carter's decade-long search for Tutankhamun's tomb. You can't do it on a shoestring, this kind of thing. And when they finally breached the sealed entrance, they unleashed not only a wealth of riches, but also a series of mysterious events that would fuel speculation for decades. Legend has it, and you like a good legend, don't you, that a curse was placed upon the tomb, warning of dire consequences for those who dared to disturb the resting place of the pharaoh. Shortly after the tomb's discovery, Lord Carnarvon fell gravely ill and died under mysterious circumstances, leading some to attribute his demise to the curse. But beyond the superstitions, there were real scientific mysteries surrounding Tutankhamun's tomb. The cause of Lord Carnarvon's death was officially recorded as blood poisoning from an infected mosquito bite. Yet some theorists suggest other explanations, including toxic gases trapped within the tomb or ancient curses with psychological effects. And then several individuals associated with the expedition, they met untimely deaths or experienced misfortune in the years following the tomb's opening too, adding fuel to the speculation of the curse. Regardless of the supernatural conjectures, the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb remains one of the greatest archaeological finds of the 20th century, offering unparalleled insights into ancient Egyptian civilization. The artifacts unearthed provided invaluable knowledge about art, religion, and daily life in ancient Egypt. And now, perched atop Beacon Hill, overlooking the serene landscape of Highclere Castle, lies the final resting place of Lord Carnarvon, the renowned British Egyptologist. who famously financed Howard Carter's expedition.
It certainly cuts a lonely figure on the landscape, or in the landscape. This particular tomb of the Earl of Carnarvon's, the 5th Earl of Carnarvon's. I'll make a picture. I've stepped back a little bit. I'm shooting today 1800 shutter speed. It's quite bright, f4, 1/60th. It's not too featureless, the sky. I think I'm going to do a little bit of dodging and burning, as they used to call it, when the pips were fashionable. Yeah, I think I can make something of those skies, because they're reasonably dramatic. I'm shooting today in portrait orientation, which is not usual for me. I'm a landscape kind of man, me. But today I've decided just to shoot portrait. I've changed it up a bit, so I have. If you'd like to write into the show, as per the letters that you hear, I'd love to hear from you. It's easy to do. Stories@photowalk.show is the address, stories@photowalk.show. It's wonderful to receive your pictures, it truly is. But if you've just got some things to say about your walks and this thing called photography, then I'm just as delighted to hear your stories and where you walk and the places you've seen, the adventures that you've had. Write to stories@photowalk.show. If you are sending in pictures, you know what's coming. Then 2,500 pixels wide, ideally, is the size that we pop onto the show page. So if you can optimize them ready for that great thing called the worldwide wonder, then please do. Otherwise, don't worry. I will do in unison now. Even the 5th Earl of Carnarvon is answering this one from beyond. I will do the heavy lifting. We've, you and I, that is, have walked almost all the way around the hill fort now. You can probably hear the rumble of traffic in the background. There's also an aircraft somewhere. Now, actually, this is a pretty good place, usually, to come to escape the aircraft, because it's quite high, and they're usually not buzzing this hill. The only time I was buzzed, have I told you this story before? I'll tell it again, Neil, just in case. Yeah, the only time I was buzzed up here was one day I was recording an episode of the Photo Walk. I was up here, and this helicopter, this Apache helicopter, appeared from absolutely nowhere. I think I'd seen it in the distance, but then it came over the hill. It was silent until it reached me, and I was so desperate to try and get a picture. I didn't succeed. I was all fingers and thumbs with the camera and the recorder. It was, it's kind of terrifying and interesting, all in equal measure. It really was. Anyway, where are we? Yeah, now usually it being the last Friday of the month, Sean Tucker would be here to answer one of your questions and grace us with a few thoughts. Very well received thoughts, actually, about photography and this thing called creativity. Now, he couldn't this week because he's travelling. So next week, I'm doing a sort of, well, I wouldn't say bumper length, but certainly a longer conversation with him. So, and also, for a long time, we've been talking about having a letters show. So there'll be more letters, some Sean, and possibly a trip to Salgado. Every week being the adventure and all. Talking of adventures, there's one place left for Scotland now. The 5th Photo Walk Retreat celebrates the feeling our podcast brings to this community, and I'm delighted to be travelling back to Scotland in September of this year, 2024. And this year we're embracing creativity on, I think, in a multi-level style. We're introducing our evening hunkered down edits together with wonderful food beforehand, conversation, and then we'll be sat round the table, editing together, talking about the experiences that we've had. We'll be embracing new creative challenges, for some people anyway, including darkroom skills. Even if you've been in the darkroom, as I've said many times before, it's still a lot of fun. I thoroughly enjoy it. And every single time I come away thinking, well, number one, Matt Sillers, who's our trainer that particular day, is an absolute genius when it comes to teaching. Number 2, that I will take over the bathroom when I return home and start a new darkroom. That journey of exploration doesn't last long. The moment that I suggest it, it's I get the eyebrows, definitely. Creative writing we're doing this time. Really looking forward to the creative writing part of the week, where we're going to learn from a professional writer and then go out and use it in the afternoon for a particular project, and how to make sound a part of your stills photography, and really a break together, because there's a retreat part to it as well. Encouraging each other, talking with each other, laughing with each other, and of course walking with each other. It's a week where not once will you have to say, "Excuse me, any chance I could have another minute here? I just haven't quite got the shot the way I want it. I could do with just working this." No, you won't have to make any excuses, because if you want to make that photograph, you make that photograph. Right, the assignment this month. Last week to get your pictures in for this one. It's set by the American iconic photographer, or is it iconic American photographer? Stephen Wilkes.
The Photo Walk assignment.
We're doing single word assignments this year. If you had to think of a word to assign, to challenge a photographer with, challenge their eyes with, what would that word be?
I'm thinking of the word in a world where we have so much tension going on right now. I feel like it'd be interesting to see if people could relate to being Zen. You know, what is Zen? A visual sense of Zen in a photograph. Yeah. It could be a lone tree in a lake that's calm. It could be, a person, sitting on a bench. It's anything that reflects calm to you, like a quiet moment that allows you to almost experience a certain kind of calmness, a certain kind of meditation in a way. It could be, I find myself when I look at rocks on the beach, it's very Zen, meditative almost. So it could be something that's very still. It could be something that maybe has emotion too. There's nothing that doesn't, or movement. It's just it's a feeling. I think that could be an interesting one for sure.
Ooh, the brakes are coming on. Just firing down these chalk hills. Stephen Wilkes has set the assignment this particular month. Good luck, and we will have a inverted commas winner. The one that really catches our eye next week. Although there's some this month, like last month, some some incredible pictures. So thank you so much for sending these in. You've been absolute stars, as you always are. Today's programme really has been about light and shade in, many ways actually, mindful ways, as much as photographic ways. And this letter has been hanging around for a good few months now. It's almost as if it's been waiting for the right moment. And if ever there were a week, I think that time has arrived. It's from our good friend of the show in Germany, Matthias Fox. Hi, Neil. Hope you're well. I am. Hope you're well as well. Last week, I took a week off and started a kind of road trip, says Matt, I had planned for years. More on that in a moment. After strong rain, it finally cleared up and I found this tree, which could count as a mallee's tree, I think. Now, this picture I can put on the show page today, and there'll possibly be more. I'm hoping that they'll come through on time so I can have them there when the show page is published with the show. I was travelling, says Matt, from the Swiss border through France and Belgium, up the coast near Ostend. I followed the Western Front of the First World War. This may explain where I found this tree. The place is called Nécropole Nationale de Brive. It's one of many cemeteries in France and Belgium. Nearly any village has one or more of these, though this quiet, reflective place holds the remains of nearly 7,000 fallen soldiers. I found it remarkable how much respect is shown by both the local population and visitors alike. I noted, said Matt, that the German cemeteries are kept in pristine condition too. They're clean, tidy, no garbage, and no graffiti anywhere. This was for me, as a German national, a most humbling experience. Of course, I'll leave it up to you whether you want to show these pictures or not. I don't intend to collect any likes for these. Best regards, Matt from Germany lands. Well, Matt, I am using the pictures on the show page today. It sounds to me like this was a very important trip for you, a journey of discovery as much the photography. So thank you for these, and the respect shown, as you point out, is so important. No matter what one's thoughts are of geopolitics or politics or the sensibilities of the topic, the respect is the important thing about this and what you photographed with these pictures that you made. You know, when we go to Scotland each year for the photo walk retreat, we visit a place called Cromarty, which is a fascinating village with, well, some would say, checkered past in some respects. And atop the hill, there's a small war cemetery in an otherwise now, well, tumble-down church. The cemetery, the war cemetery, is kept absolutely immaculate. Each gravestone is a silent testament to courage, and it's been respected so. The acknowledgement of another person's humanity, recognition for them, and dignity, which is really important. I haven't had a chance to visit these places in France or Belgium, though I have in other parts of the world. It's certainly an intention of mine one day to do so. And this seems like such an apposite place to bring back my guest Stephen Dupont for part 2 of our conversation. We talk about much in this half, some personal thoughts about his mother and perhaps her relationship to what he does, the delicacy of a moment in Afghanistan, which leads to a chat about the imperfect perfect. But we'll start with that most incredible show that I talked about right at the start of the walk today. Here's part 2 of my conversation with Stephen Dupont.
In a conversation of firsts, let's have another one. In all the conversations I've had with photographers, filmmakers, journalists, I know that many speak on stages about their approach and their experience, their feelings about photography as a genre, where they've been, what they've done, what they've seen. But I've never spoken with a photographer who created a theatrical experience. This is called Don't Look Away. Again, that's a project as well. You can see there's a project of that name on the website. It's a theatrical experience, which I really hope to find as a film somewhere to watch, and I haven't been able to watch it. I wish I had. I wish I could. Tell me about it. Yeah. The theatre, the subject. It's because you could do a TED talk, but you did this.
you just hit the nail on the head, Neil. It's exactly right. I did a one-man show quite a few years ago. It sort of came out of an idea that I had when I was, proposing this at the time, and I just felt that I'd done a lot of talks and I'd done a lot of presentations and slideshows and TED Talk-like things, and done sort of, talks for Apple and, different camera companies and so forth, and showing my photography in that very kind of TED Talk kind of way. And I just felt that I needed to do something different. I just felt that how can I show my photography to a live audience and present it in a different way? Again, we come back to death. My mother had passed away a few months before I did the first show. And, she became a part of the show. Wow. And in fact, the whole show is really around her and how I spent my life going to these dangerous places and never really explaining to her what I was doing and holding back a lot of the things that I saw and the risks that I was taking, because it's your mother and you don't want to worry them. And so when I made this performance, I did it in a way that I was confessing my life to her finally, but confessing to her spirit, because she'd passed away. But the show really was something that, again, it was just, how am I going to show something in a different way? And I got the idea to set up my studio on stage with books and my light box, and we curated a visual film that ran behind me. And so it was in sync with my dialogue.
Oh, so you weren't necessarily introducing pictures. The pictures behind you were naturally dovetailing with your conversation.
Playing.
Wow.
Yeah, so there's a film playing behind me.
Yeah.
But the film is mostly photographs.
Yeah.
But it's also my mum comes on and she's talking and, there's many elements, but essentially it's playing as I'm narrating a dialogue about my life in photography. So it was an incredible challenge. And again, it was something that I'm deeply proud of. And I made about 5 or 6 performances just here in Australia, and I kind of had the idea that I might take it overseas, but as things move on, life goes on, you just kind of lose momentum a bit, and I got onto other things. But it's interesting because there's someone here in Australia that I'm starting to work with that would like me to bring back that show and film the show to possibly do something. So you may end up seeing something down the track as a kind of a film. Well,
I hope I might end up seeing it in London, is what I'm really hoping.
Well, that would be amazing. But I don't know if I'm going to make, I'll make, what do you call it? It's not Broadway. What's London?
We have the West End. It's the West End for us,
The West End.
Yeah. Well, once you start, you can't stop. You could be going 5, 6, 7 years.
But it's an amazing thing because it was the first time that I could speak honestly about the photography and about my mom and about my life and about philosophy and inspirations and it was interesting because it was really kind of, it's like, because I'm kind of talking to her, so it's a sort of way of kind of getting my story out, but I'm questioning why I do it as well, and I'm and it's certainly not all kind of praiseful, because there's a lot of stuff in there that I'm not proud of, and I'm very honest about talking about those things. So it's very it was an incredible experience.
I would imagine it was very exhausting as well. Within the performance, there's a filmed sequence involving your work with Ahmad Massoud, the Afghan military leader. Tell me about him, or tell us about him, and perhaps linger a little bit on a particular picture that's very important of him looking skywards.
Yeah, Ahmad Shah Massoud was the leader of the former leader of the Northern Alliance in Afghanistan, and the Northern Alliance were the military alliance that were at the time fighting against the Taliban. Now, we've got to go back to 1996 to 2000 period, so before the War on Terror. In fact, Massoud was assassinated in 2001 on September 9, two days before September 11. Yeah. So my trips with Massoud started when he was defense minister, and then again later while he was the leader of the alliance that were fighting the Taliban. And that photograph was something that, it's one of my personal favorites, actually. And I love it because it's simple and it has so much humanity to it. And because of who the subject is as well. I mean, Massoud was, a warlord. Some people would call him a war criminal, and some people would call him a savior and a great leader. And, but essentially he was a warlord, and he was an incredibly serious and thoughtful kind of guy. And I'd spent a lot of time photographing him for some French magazines. And this moment was in an orchard, and they just had a prayer session, and they got up and there was some apples and pears sitting in a tray, and it was dusk. It's my favorite time to photograph. So the sun's gone down and it's almost dark. And this is film, so I'm shooting on Kodachrome, which was beautiful film to use for those situations, Kodachrome 200. And, slow shutter speed and beautiful light, and just this moment where he looked up into the heavens, into the skies, and very spiritual. Has a very kind of almost Renaissance feel to it, I think. It's got a very painterly feel to it.
Well, it comes back actually to the imperfect perfect, doesn't it? Because it was a slow shutter, slight movement within the picture, but it's absolutely beautiful. It's a truly incredible picture. I read a poem by Carol Ann Duffy at the start of the show, who was a friend of Don McCullin and the late Philip Jones Griffiths, both revered for their work, particularly in Vietnam. And I'd like to quote the latter from his page on Magnum. "The ability to keep things in perspective is very important for a journalist. In a tense situation, you need the ability to be there, yet somehow step aside to keep a cool head and keep working without getting frustrated. Now, that quote and the poem I read talk of frustration, and it's a conversation I've had before with conflict photographers and war photojournalists, this battle with that one word, frustration. Is frustration a sentiment you try hard to keep at bay while you're working?
Frustration's not something that I would point to, first and foremost in my feelings of while I'm kind of out in the field photographing. Patience is a big thing. Loneliness often is a big thing. And I suppose the frustration comes in when the photographs aren't being published necessarily, or the photographs that you want aren't being published. So then you're frustrated with an editor and, frustrated with that magazine or that newspaper. There's times when things are just taking too long and you're you go through all these frustrations. But I don't know. I mean, it's sort of something that I've kind of felt so much for the people that I photograph that I almost forget myself. It's strange, but whenever I go into these places, and people often ask me, like, how do you do this? How do you see what you see? How do you, take those risks and walk away? And I always come back to the same answer, and it's that it's the people I'm photographing who are suffering. They're the people that I'm there to photograph, and they're the ones that I'm concerned about, and they're the subject matter that I want to show to the world what's going on. And so a lot of my own feelings I tend to just put under the carpet. I tend to just put to the side until I deal with them later. I get into such a zone that I'm just so committed to getting those photographs and trying to honor the subject and the people and the situation, try and be as truthful as I possibly can in these situations and respect those people who are often dying or suffering or starving. I think of Gaza right now, and it's insane. It's just insane. And so my situation is I'm a visitor. I can leave. I almost have no right to have any kind of frustration or any kind of feelings. And I'm quite hard on myself. And the only times that I felt that kind of frustration or that kind of post-trauma is when I've come home after a story and I've had to deal with people who either don't take the pictures seriously or, don't understand the story I'm trying to make. When I started photographing really from London in 93, Bosnia was the big story. And I chose not to go because I just felt there were so many people covering that story and they were doing it so well. And they were friends and colleagues of mine, Tom Stoddard and Roger Hutchings and people like that were people that, I was with often back in London. And there were times I felt like, God, I should go. And I was like, well, no, because there are so many other stories and so many people that need their voice out there. And so I started to look at Africa. I went to Angola and I went to Afghanistan, and these were forgotten stories. They were unknown, or they were equally traumatic, and people that needed their story told. So I started to see this kind of world, and that became frustrating because it wasn't the sexy story. It wasn't, no one cared less about Angola. I mean, I would go there for Newsweek and get one photograph in the middle of the magazine and, who's going to look at that? Yet these were big, for me, they were big stories and needed to be told. So the frustration came from spending all this time and energy, and often on my own expense and my own risks, that I would come back and people wouldn't want to expose the story in the way that it should have been.
It's an interesting aspect of your work, and making these decisions to go and tell pictures and stories of sometimes what you might say are the invisible, the people that aren't being covered by the newspapers and getting the attention that they deserve. How does that actually work when you're working for newspapers and magazines? Are people in the office, are they open to you saying, look, you've got to show this because this is happening? And they'll say, well, that's all right, Stephen, but if you could put yourself on a plane, we can't insure you for this particular one, but get yourself out there, maybe we'll think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I spent so much time doing things on spec. I was rarely assigned. Most of my work was my own. Maybe I'd get a small guarantee, and I'd have a magazine sort of stress some interest, like you said, show us the pictures when you get home. Yeah. I spent a lot of time doing that. Obviously, as you become more experienced and more known, then the assignments start coming a little bit more regularly. Yeah. Assignments were always great because they paid well and it was a guarantee. But I can say that my best work was never on an assignment. My best work was always my own self-funded project, yeah, or the risk that I took financially, to go and cover something. These were the stories that produced, I think, my most powerful photography. And then I would have to come back and my agency would have to try and sell the pictures or sell the story. And sometimes they did and sometimes they didn't. Mm. I mean, being a freelancer is frustrating. I mean, there's no question about it, but it's a life you choose to take. I'd go back to your original question of why. It's freedom. And I became a photographer to have that freedom. And I sort of became a freelancer to have that freedom, so I wouldn't have to be beholden to, being told what stories I had to go and cover and so forth. So I love that freedom of being able to go and choose to go and make the stories that I wanted to make and to take the photographs that I wanted to take.
I'd not be doing my job if I didn't. I know you love Africa. You have a love of India as well. And lightening the moment just for a second, you do so love India. You've worked with our friend Russell Shakespeare out there. You photographed out there. And we're going there, as you know, next year on a photographic adventure. You are too. I think you're in the country at the same time, but you're in a different part of it. Tell me about your relationship with the place and why it's so special to you.
Wow. Well, India goes back to the first time I took photographs. So I was in India when I was 18. So I left school and I had an around the world ticket. And at this point, I didn't know what I was going to do in life. And I had a camera with me. I had a Pentax K1000. That was my first camera and film, of course. And I took that with me and I took snapshots, I guess they were, and photographed my travels. And I got to India and I think something happened there because something so profound in me personally, and also that would lead me into photography because I was just so blown away by this country. Everything from the poverty, the beauty, the food, the culture, the history, everything just hit me like a hammer, but for the good. I found the experience incredibly confronting, and I reveled in it, and I traveled there for a couple of months, and I started to look at photographing in a more kind of personal way, I suppose, and I think I fell in love with photography while I was in India, and it really kind of just generated this incredible beauty and sort of craziness, and it really gelled with me, and I think when I got back home, when I made that decision, to be a photographer, India never left me. And in fact, I've continued to go there my whole life. And my first book that I ever had published was on India. It was the Last Steam Trains of India, which was published by Dowie Lewis in the UK. It was a book that I was, still am incredibly proud of. The demise of the steam train industry, the last steam trains of India. It got me to all of these incredible locations and, again, a self-funded personal project that produced some fine pictures.
Well, I know when you first went this trip you're talking about, you went to Bombay, or Mumbai as it's now known, which is where we're going, and I'm thoroughly looking forward to it and the plans that we're putting together. In terms of the trains, which we will be taking, any suggestions?
Oh, well, we'll definitely go on the roof. If it's too crowded inside, the roof is definitely the place to be. Yeah. Just watch those power lines and the tunnels. No, I mean, look, I have to say trains are glorious in India.
Yeah.
Whether it's first class, which is really great, comfortable, or third class, or whatever they call it now, standard everyday class. It's amazing too. I mean, for pictures anyway, if you're interested in that kind of madness of passengers on the train. But the trains itself they are the lifeblood of India, and it's an incredible way to see the countryside and to travel around. And I would suggest, any train journey is going to be fascinating, whether it's on a local third-class wagon or whether it's Alice on Wheels.
Yeah, there's a lovely route, I think, down to Goa, and if you really have the train legs, all the way down to Kerala. But that's quite the journey. No,
I loved traveling around by train, and I'm not even a train spotter, but I love the trains, and I made a whole book on them. It was incredible, and it was amazing project, and it really that trip just actually I got to see more of India on that trip than any other. I mean, that was an incredible kind of window into the whole country in so many ways.
Your work in terms of the human relationship with our planet. Now, there's an extraordinary film on your website, which I will link to in terms of bushfires and how Australia's been affected by climate change. This, I think, you've referred to as your greatest war challenge. I think this is where photographers can really affect public opinion. It's been done in a different manner by many photographers. I think of Salgado's incredible exhibition that I saw in London a couple of years ago, where he immersed himself in the beauty of the world to make his point about climate change. There's so many different ways to photograph this plight. After your work in terms of this particular subject matter, do you feel hope?
I think I have to feel hope for the future generations and for my daughter.
Yeah.
In fact, the project came out of my daughter's generation, and she's 16 now. But she came out of the sort of the Greta Thunberg kind of era of consciousness, and seeing her as a young 10-year-old back then to sort of start asking these questions about how long is the planet going to survive, and is it going to be around when I get older? And should we be having children or not? Because are we even going to exist? These kind of profound, big questions were really hit hard for me, and coming from my own daughter. So it was something that was very personal. And then at the time, Australia was going through some really horrific bushfires. We called it the Black Summer of 2019. And so I started to photograph that. And I mean, I'd been photographing climate-related work before that, but it started to build on this sort of project about the title that I kind of worked with was "Are We Dead Yet?" with a question mark. And it's really that fundamental question that I think we should all be asking ourselves is, have we stepped over the edge? Have we gone too far? Can we come back? These are questions that need to be looked at. And I don't know the answers to them, but there's certainly questions on my mind. I look at the world now and I think, well, it's a grave situation. And there's a side of me that unfortunately feels that with everything that's going on, that we possibly we've left it too late. And that saddens me deeply. But then there's the optimist side of me that bloody well hopes that I'm wrong and that the planet is going to survive for a lot longer than I think,
I think projects like Are We Dead Yet? I mean, that's photographers, I think, can play an enormous role in making people aware of what's happening. I think they really can. I don't want to disappoint you. We started with the why question, and I think we can possibly have another why question. So we sort of bookend it, which is pertinent, of course, when we're talking to somebody who so loves the work of books. I asked you why you photograph, and I'm intrigued, actually, why you continue, why carry on.
Because I'm not qualified to do anything else in life. If I didn't photograph, I think I would just be at the beach surfing every day.
That sounds like a nice life. There's nothing wrong with that. Bad idea.
No, it's not a bad, alternative, is it? I do that anyway. But look, I continue because I still believe that my photographs will have some sort of impact, will have some sort of enjoyment from people who see them. And I, first and foremost, enjoy taking the photographs. I think that I'm far less serious about the kind of photography that I'm taking. I'm much more sort of open and easy about the projects, the reasonings behind them, and so forth, and becoming a lot more open about so many things to do with photography. I'm not taking it so seriously anymore, although there are often some serious matters, and I'm not discounting the subject matter, but my own motivation is purely that I feel that, I'm still enjoying it so much. I still love the art of photography. I love the moment. I love the challenge. I love the creativity of making these moments in time. I think they're incredibly important still. I think they hold a great canvas of history, and I think that they are our memories of our time. And I got into photography because of these answers I'm giving you. I think at the beginning, it's like it is all about that moment, that being able to capture these very powerful moments. I mean, there is no more powerful medium than photography, I don't think, in terms of the power it can have on people.
And my thanks today to Stephen Dupont for being my studio guest during our photo walk. Now, we did reference a moment within today's conversation, a time from Afghanistan that could have ended in such a way that, I wouldn't have had the extreme honour of talking to this fascinating man. And that will be a feature of today's Extra Mile chat, where Stephen returns to talk about a day when, only 5 metres away, a suicide bomber could have changed his story and history completely, possibly finally.
On this week's Extra Mile.
It's interesting because, when I first landed in London, I was a nobody and I had to start from scratch. And I was, like I said before, I'm competing not just against people in London, but against the whole world. For some reason, we were waiting to pick up some either supplies or some extra police, or we weren't quite sure. We were just waiting, and we were in the back of a police Ford Ranger truck. And then there was an explosion that I felt that, this was a kind of a rare situation where you're both a victim and a witness at the same time. It's it's so immediate.
So yes, Stephen Dupont returns for part 3 of our conversation in an Extra Mile, where we also talk about his project work. And, I take a few projects in particular. If you go to his website, you'll find a plethora of them. And I choose, was it 2 or 3? 3, I think. But really do go visit the website. The links will be on the show page today, as you would expect. And there's also some pictures. He gave me permission to use as many pictures as I wanted. So I put a few up for you on the show page, so that you can see the kind of work. What I'll do is I'll choose the ones that relate to what we've been talking about today. The Extra Mile, if you'd like to listen to Stephen or join our support community, because that's what it very much is, it's a community, is on our private Patreon channel, where our wonderful community of supporters, as I said, our walkers, our photographers, who want to help keep this podcast here week after week, make a modest and generous monthly or annual contribution. Go to the orange button at the top of the website, the one that says support the show, and you can join us. Now, I want to try and make my way to the trig point for the final part of the show today. Isn't that amazing? You just drop down into... Could you notice that? I dropped down, literally, just meters between into a gully at the top of this fort. And the sound of the... all I can hear, myself, is the wind. You won't be able to hear that. I'm sheltering you from it. But certainly the traffic completely disappeared. That was strange. That was like walking into a studio, shutting the door behind you, and the sound going quiet. But I want to make my way to the trig point, because in fact it's quite windy up the top. So let me just record this bit with you just here. Here we go. The trig point, because I'm hoping, I don't remember, but I'm hoping that it might answer the mystery of just how many meters this hill, this mountainette is. Our PS to the show is to come, but before that we need a play-out song just to make some final frames to or think about what's been said today. Now, I've gone perhaps a bit left field on this one, considering the tempo of today's show, but in terms of the light and shade of our conversation, I think Made of Stars by a band called Control S, inspired name for a band, by the way, IMHO, I think Made of Stars is absolutely perfect because it talks of regeneration, which in many ways is I think that's the mood in which I'm left today. These endless stories we have to tell, these stories that are of light and darkness, night and day, as the words go, in this sort of, light hip-hop inspired song.
We're made of stars that died away a long, long time before today. All is endless, just a dance of light and darkness, of life and death. Just a play of light and darkness, of night and day.
Made of Stars by Control S, and that's our play-out song for today. This is strange. Earlier, when I was by the tomb of the 5th Earl of Carnarvon, a figure approached, or started to approach, or was on the top of the brim of the hill, of which I just sort of nearer where the trig point is. And I looked around, and I thought, oh, right, he's just on his way over. I'll try and record these words before he arrives. And then he just disappeared. I looked back I took my picture of the tomb, of the fenced tomb, looked round, gone. I'm not suggesting anything ghostly, no, but it was strange. Right, let's put these letters down for a second. I'll get the final, for me anyway, final sketchbook image of the show. I'm going to call this one Approaching the Trig. which is, we talked about trig points before. It's it cuts a very lonely figure. Well, it's kind of balanced. There's some brush to the left, a bush, and then to the right, the trig, and then weaving off another chalk path here. 2700 shutter speed, f4, 160 ISO. It might well be, for my sketchbook, these sketchbook images, that if the meters are written on the side of the trig, or the feet, which I'll then have to try and work out, are on the side of the trig, I'll make another picture. If not, I'll just be in, well, not quite sure what's happened to those few meters that once were here. Can hills shrink? No, Neil, don't be daft. Probably over a lot of time, but not over the few months since you last went up. True. Just a few closing thoughts then before the PS. My sincere thanks to you if you are or you're about to become an extra miler. My promise to you is to keep building this community. It's very precious, I think, what we're building here. It's a very different kind of podcast. Stephen Dupont actually said that when I was chatting with him. He said it's very different, and he is a listener, which I was exceptionally flattered by. But yeah, he said it's very different. I've not heard anything quite like it. No, that's why we do it. Like all those things in life where you think, oh, I think I've hit on something that's a good idea. It really came about as part of an accident. You know this story, but just in case you're new around here, and for my other listener who doesn't listen incredibly well when I'm telling stories, just rolls their eyes usually. It was only because when we were doing this as a daily show, and the title was Photography Daily, the clues on the tin, then it came to a Thursday. I used to record everything literally 48 hours sometimes at most before the program went out. So it was very current. And then one Thursday, the guest for the next day said, I can't make the show tomorrow. So it became the photo walk. And then that concept, that just sort of lived on, really. That's why it became the photo walk. Anyway, I'm still walking towards the trig. So yeah, we do have a wonderful community of supporters. And if you can help in that way by being a member of the Extra Mile, then in return, I record an extra edition every single week. And we have some live shows as well each month. There's hundreds of bits on the Patreon channel. If you join us, just go to that orange button. And if you know of somebody who might like to walk with us, then mention it to them. Maybe go into one of your Facebook groups, or I don't know, a camera club group, or whatever kind of social you use, or maybe email a friend of yours to say, look, I know this podcast, give it a listen, you just might like it. My thanks to Neil Ford, who looks after IT, Andrea Gilpin, who's across Instagram, and Kelly Mitchell, who looks after our Facebook members. Next week, it's Sean Tucker and letters. Look, I'm getting ever closer to this trig point. Please say the meters on it. We'll need a postscript for the show. But before I do that, here it is, trig point. It's a concrete point on the top of a hill used to triangulate Britain. And, it's got a plaque there. Ordnance Survey, that's the OS bit. BMS 1682. That's obviously just a number of the trig point, probably. Let's walk around it. Look on the top of it. Put my letters down on it. Nothing. It will be and remain a mystery. Neil, if you want it to be 263 metres, you make it 263 metres. All right, I will. Right, a postscript for the show. Today, Fragility. And it's from May Sarton. Now, May Sarton was the pen name of Eleanor Marie Sarton, a Belgian-American novelist, poet, and memoirist. I like the idea of being a memoirist. Could you do that professionally? A memoirist. And I think she sums up fragility perfectly. And it's the PS, the postscript, the final thoughts for the show today. It's sometimes, says May, the most fragile things that have the power to endure and become sources of strength.
The Photo Walk is a Loading Zone production.